Now we begin with several Turkish military trucks carrying tanks and other armored vehicles have crossed the border into Syrian city of Azaz in the north. Now deployment comes as Turkish Prime Minister bin Ali Yildirim says that a ground operation is expected to begin Sunday. Earlier, Turkish military began its airstrikes against Kurdish YPG and PYD positions in Syria's northern Afrin region. A YPG spokesman says air raids have killed 10 people, most of them civilians. Skirmishes also reported at the edge of the Kurdish-dominated Afrin region near the Turkish border. Escalation came just hours after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that his country had launched an operation to oust what he called Kurdish militants in the Syrian town of Afrin.
And now, starting from the west, step by step, we'll totally destroy this corridor. The Afrin operation has de facto started in this field. Manbij will follow, because none of the promises that were made regarding Manbij have been followed through until now. Then no one has the right to say a word when we do what needs to be done.
On Saturday, the Turkish Army shelled several shelters and hideouts used by Kurdish militants belonging to the PKK, the PYD, and the YPG. Damascus says the operation has violated its sovereignty. Also, SDF, which is an alliance of Kurdish and Arab fighters in Syria, has vowed to defend itself. Last week, the U.S. announced plans to form a 30,000-strong Kurdish-led border security force in Syria. Erdogan responded by pledging to, quote, drown this army of terror before it's born. Joining us out of Bristol for On the Story now is Mr. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist. Hello, Tony. Thanks for joining us back on the program. Now, Tony, the strangest scenario here. I mean, you have your ally, your NATO ally. I'm referring to Washington and Ankara, bombing positions, and now about to incur upon a ground operation on a group that you've been arming and training, and now purportedly you're going to boost their numbers up to 30,000. So where does Washington stand with Ankara on this? They told them to stand down. Ankara has blatantly just refused to. Your thoughts?
Well, it sounds like a bit of a family squabble going on within NATO, doesn't it? Because these are US-backed people in Afrin. Also, I think it's not a very good sense of humour for the Turkish military to call this. I was reading on CNN, Operation Olive Branch. It's precisely the opposite. It's designed to cause much more tension between the Kurds and the Turks, which is not a good idea at this stage, because there are talks going on right now between Assad's government in Damascus and the Kurds, which could potentially lead to a homeland of some sort up in northern Syria for the Kurds. That, I mean, it may not happen, but it is a potential thing. And if those talks are successful, that would bring an end to the Kurdish problem for Turkey, which has been going on for decades. So really the Turks are not helping by bombing and using artillery in Syria. In fact, what is Erdogan doing in Syria? I mean, we could ask the same about the United States and Britain, who've been interfering in there through their intelligence services without the approval of the UN, without the approval of Parliament, as well now since 2011. In fact, it was Roland Dumas, the former French foreign minister under Sarkozy, that actually said he was invited by the British to start an armed uprising in Syria. So, Erdogan is joining, I think, with the Americans and the British again in interfering in Syria. He really should just get his hand out of there. And if he does, there's a possibility there could be an end to the problems between the Kurds and the Turks.
And Tony, and another thing here, I mean, what kind of precedent does this set? You've seen two states here, riddled with terrorism in the last few years, Syria and Iraq. Turkey has taken advantage of both these situations and bombed Kurdish positions in both these countries without a mandate, without any kind of coordination with Damascus or with Baghdad. Damascus is irate over this recent move by Turkey. Why does Erdogan not take into account that these two countries are eventually going to regain their sovereignty, and what kind of ties they're going to have with their neighbors in the future?
Well, it's called realpolitik, or as one British soldier I spoke to called it, stealing for the tribe. Whenever there's disruptions in countries around you, the temptation is for an unscrupulous leader. And let's face it, most of the world leaders, particularly in the West, are unscrupulous. Their temptation is to go and grab territory, go and grab a little bit of land. In fact, this has been going on since the beginning of time. And so I think that's what's going on here. But, there is an excuse that's being used But actually, I think Erdogan really just wants to grab a bit of territory, as the Americans and the British have been looking, and the French have been looking at Syria as potential resources to grab over a long period of time. This was actually put forward in, it's not me saying this, in the US Army Journal back in 2006 by American Army Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. His map was called the New Middle East. He wanted a kind of new state called Free Kurdistan, and that was part of the balkanization of the Middle East, which was the make way for countries like Israel, who are kind of Western puppets, to expand. The idea was to disrupt it, as happened in Yugoslavia, and then for the Western NATO to move in, the big corporations to come in and take over. If there's a war, what they do is they send in these reconstruction companies who make billions of pounds reconstructing, so they don't balk even at creating war when it suits them.
Thanks, Tony. We're all out of time, but it's really interesting where Washington is going to do, abandon or help the Kurds in this situation. I want to thank you for joining us, Mr. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, joining us there out of Bristol.